On a warm Saturday afternoon in late June of 1983, a cheerful picnic deep inside the Helena National Forest should have been nothing more than a day of sunshine, families, and the sound of children laughing beside a shallow mountain creek. But before the day was over, a 4-year-old girl would vanish without a single trace. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not even a direction she may have walked. Her disappearance would ignite one of the largest search operations Montana had ever seen, draw in federal agents, inspire years of mysterious letters and phone calls, and leave behind a trail of heartbreak that has never been resolved. This is the story of Nyleen Kay Marshall, a child who walked into the forest and was never seen again. Before we begin, please take a moment to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button. Here at Beyond the Case, we bring you the mysteries that refuse to let go. Your support helps us tell the stories that matter. It was the 25th of June, 1983. Members of the Capital City Radio Club had gathered in a remote part of the Helena National Forest, nestled in the Elkhorn Mountains, not far from Warm Springs Creek Road. The area was postcard perfect. Towering pines, the calm sound of the creek, patches of wildflowers, and the laughter of children carrying across the water. Among those children was 4-year-old Nyleen Kay Marshall. She had been born on September 18, 1978, the daughter of Nancy and William. After their divorce, Nancy remarried Kim Marshall, who legally adopted Nyleen. Kim always said the same thing about her. She was an angelic child, sweet, gentle, and full of curiosity. On that day, she was with her mother Nancy, her adoptive father Kim, her older brother, and her younger sister. Everything about the day felt ordinary, perfectly ordinary. And that is what makes what happened next so chilling. The children played along the banks of Warm Springs Creek, hopping across rocks, splashing their hands in the cool water, and chasing frogs through the shallow pools. Nyleen had been playing alongside 2 older children, while others explored an abandoned cabin nearby. The moment that still haunts everyone began so simply. The children started walking back to rejoin the adults. And Nyleen wasn't with them. Those who had been next to her said they had walked only a few steps ahead. When they turned to check on her, she was gone. No sound, no cry, no movement in the bushes, nothing but the steady trickle of the creek. Parents called her name at first with mild concern, then with fear, then with panic. But the forest gave them nothing back. Law enforcement arrived quickly, and they immediately recognized the enormous challenge before them. The terrain around the Elkhorn Mountains was unpredictable. Thick forest, steep hillsides, scattered mine shafts, and dozens of places where a small child could easily be hidden by the landscape. Jefferson County called for additional support from Lewis and Clark Search and Rescue. Soon, the sky filled with helicopters equipped with heat-sensing devices. On the ground, search teams fanned out in all directions. As hours passed and darkness approached, the silence in the forest grew heavier. Over the next several days, nearly 3,000 searches would be conducted. Volunteers flooded the area, almost 3,000 people, many from the family's church, many of whom had never met the Marshalls at all. They simply wanted to help. They walked miles, crawled through brush, shouted her name into every direction of the forest, searched along ridgelines, ravines, and abandoned structures. Specially trained dogs were brought in. Planes swept overhead. Divers checked bodies of water. Mine shafts were explored. Even a pond was drained completely. And yet, there was no sign of Nyleen, not even the small yellow shirt she was wearing, or the shorts she had on when she disappeared. To understand the scale of the search, it helps to picture the terrain. The Elkhorn Mountains are not gentle. They are rugged, steep, and unforgiving. Even adults with experience struggle to navigate certain parts of the area. Now imagine being 4 years old, barefoot, a child who hated walking without shoes. Search teams could not understand how she could have covered any significant distance, especially with so many people so close by. But despite that, day after day passed without a single clue. Veteran searchers later recalled the emotional weight of those days. One volunteer said he could still feel the knot in his stomach decades later. Another described the heartbreaking moment when, After 5 days of searching in cold, wind, and rain, the reality they had tried so hard to push away finally crept in. That the chances of finding a child alive in those conditions were growing smaller by the hour? Still, no one gave up. Every new morning brought fresh volunteers. Every night ended with aching feet but stubborn hope. No one could bear the idea of a child being alone in the mountains. Then something happened. Something that changed the direction of the entire investigation. Several children who had been down by the creek came forward with new information. They had seen someone. A man. In a purple jogging suit. Someone none of them recognized. 2 young girls said he stepped out from behind a group of trees and walked straight toward Nyleen as she sat near the beaver dams. One child remembered Nyleen saying something like, "My brother can run faster than you." Another child said she heard Nyleen mention something about following a shadow. The details were unsettling. The children had not spoken to each other about this. They described this man independently. It suggested one terrifying possibility. Nyleen Kay Marshall hadn't wandered off. She may have been abducted. This revelation shifted everything. Law enforcement now had to consider that a stranger had been near the children, someone not connected to the picnic group. But there was a problem. The forest had been chaotic that first day. Hundreds of searchers had flooded the area. Tracks were trampled. Scents were weakened. The possibility of finding physical evidence had decreased dramatically. Still, the focus shifted fast. Flyers with Nyleen's photo were distributed nationwide. Her mother and father sent out thousands of them. Tips poured in from all across the United States. Sightings, leads, possible matches. None of them led anywhere. The case, once filled with energy, slowly began losing traction. After 10 days on the 4th of July, as snow began falling across the mountains, the official search was suspended. For those who had given everything, it was devastating. For Nancy and Kim, it was unbearable. But they refused to give up. They couldn't. With the official search paused, law enforcement turned to the family for standard investigative procedures. But the Marshalls later described this experience as deeply painful. The pressure, the questions, and one comment, allegedly made by an agent, that struck the family like a blow, something no parent should ever hear. It left Nancy heartbroken and furious. She didn't want anyone to stop searching. She didn't want anyone to assume the worst. She wanted her daughter back. She needed answers. And yet, the investigation was about to take another turn, one no one could have predicted. A turn involving anonymous phone calls, disturbing letters, and a mysterious man who claimed to have Nyleen and to be raising her as his own. More than 2 years passed, with no trace of Nyleen. No footprints. No clothing. No verified sightings. Then, on the 27th day of November in 1985, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received a phone call that would jolt the entire investigation back to life. The caller refused to give his name. He spoke calmly, disturbingly calmly, and he said one thing that made seasoned investigators freeze. He claimed he was Nyleen's abductor, and he claimed she was still alive. Even if it was a hoax, it could not be ignored. Too many years had passed, with no progress. Too many questions had no answers. The call sparked the beginning of a bizarre chapter in the case, a chapter filled with contradictions, twists, and deeply unsettling statements. 2 months after that anonymous call, another clue surfaced, this time in the form of a handwritten letter mailed to Child Find, an organization dedicated to missing children. The letter was postmarked from Madison, Wisconsin. The writer claimed to be the same man who made the phone call. And he said again, "I have Nyleen. I have cared for her." His words were written with an eerie calmness, as if he believed what he was doing was not wrong, but in some twisted way, noble. He said, "Is greater than. She is a sweet little girl. She laughs when we clown around. She hugs me sometimes for no reason. I love her. And I have her. I love her." Investigators reading the letter felt a cold, creeping dread. Something about the tone felt disturbingly intimate. He wrote as if Nyleen belonged to him. He said he had renamed her. He no longer called her Nyleen. He used her middle name instead, Kay. He described her appearance in detail. He described her dental progression. He described her height and weight. He described her daily routines, brushing her teeth, taking baths, learning at home. Most alarming of all, he described traveling across the country with her: Chicago, New York, San Francisco, New Orleans, Canada, Puerto Rico, even Britain, places a small child could not simply visit unnoticed. But he insisted, "est supérieur à nobody questions passports." Investigator Neil Patel later explained the chilling interpretation. If there was no ransom demand, if there was no financial motive, then the motivation was something else entirely: to possess a child. And this raised a terrifying question. Was this man the person in the purple jogging suit? More letters arrived over the next 6 months. Some reached the Marshalls directly, phone calls from payphones, all in Madison, Wisconsin. Federal agents eventually identified the exact phone booth the caller used, but each time surveillance teams arrived, he was already gone. The calls stopped as suddenly as they began. The letters stopped. And just like that, the trail that had seemed so promising evaporated once again. Nancy, Nyleen's mother, felt certain the letters were real. Many of the details matched unpublicized information. Even the way he referred to Nyleen using her middle name had weight. Still, without physical evidence, without a suspect, without a location, the investigation stalled. The man who claimed to have her had vanished, just as she had. In June of 1989, another potential break surfaced. Nyleen's uncle saw a composite sketch released by law enforcement in another case, a separate child abduction involving a man and a woman traveling together. He believed he recognized the couple. He said he had seen them near the search area on the very first day Nyleen disappeared, lingering among the volunteers. A chilling detail, if true, because predators sometimes do return to the scene. Police investigated the couple, but no evidence linked them to Nyleen. Another lead ended in nothing. In November of 1990, the television program Unsolved Mysteries aired a detailed segment on Nyleen's case. Millions of viewers saw her story. Millions saw her age-progressed image, what she might look like at age 12. And one viewer recognized someone, a student in his class who resembled the age-progressed image. Police acted quickly. They tracked her down. Blood tests were compared to Nyleen's biological father. The result? She was not Nyleen. But something unexpected happened. The girl officers located was a missing child, one who had been abducted by her non-custodial father 8 years earlier. Because someone recognized Nyleen's age-progressed photo, another missing child went home. Yet the one case that had prompted the call remained unsolved. Nyleen was still nowhere. In August of 1991, a convicted offender named Richard James Wilson came forward while on probation. He claimed he had information. He claimed he had harmed a woman in Great Falls. And then he claimed he had killed Nyleen. Investigators listened cautiously. He described mine shafts. He described locations. He described what he said he had done. But something felt wrong. His story changed every time he repeated it. His details contradicted earlier statements. He couldn't pinpoint the mine shaft he supposedly used. Police took him to the Elkhorn Mountains. He could not identify the location. Search teams explored the area anyway. Nothing. No remains. No clothing. Nothing at all. Wilson later retracted his confession. He was released due to lack of evidence. Another lead, perhaps the darkest one yet, collapsed. Years passed. And then, in 1995, tragedy struck the Marshall family once again. Nancy traveled alone to Mexico to prepare for the family's relocation. While Kim and the children were preparing to join her, police in Mexico City discovered Nancy in her hotel room. Her death was sudden, shocking, deeply suspicious. The initial ruling claimed she had taken her own life. But Kim did not believe this. He hired a private investigator. He pushed for answers. There were details that did not align. The hotel room door had been kicked in. Her hands had been bound. Her wedding ring was gone. But Kim was warned. Pushing for a homicide investigation, he was told, could delay the return of Nancy's body. He faced an impossible choice. In the end, he brought her home. But he never stopped believing someone hurt her. Nancy was buried in Texas. Her daughter still missing. Her search unfinished. 3 years later, in 1998, the Unsolved Mysteries episode aired again. That night, a nurse in New Orleans saw something on the television that stopped her cold. She recognized the name. She recognized the age progression. She recognized details she couldn't ignore. She remembered a young woman who had come into the hospital a few years earlier, about to give birth, accompanied by a man. The woman called herself Helena, but she struggled with basic questions about her past, her address, her childhood, her family. Something had felt off. Then, suddenly, without explanation, she disappeared from the hospital before treatment. Federal agents tracked this woman down. Blood tests were performed. They compared her DNA to Nyleen's father. The results came back. She was not Nyleen. Another near miracle that dissolved into nothing. As the 1990s ended and the 2000s began, Nyleen Kay Marshall's disappearance remained one of the most confounding mysteries in Montana's history. By then, investigators who had searched for her in the freezing rain, crawled across rocky hillsides, and descended into old mine shafts, had moved on to other careers, other cases, and other chapters of life. Yet this case never let go of them. Veteran search and rescue volunteer Ken Gardner later said that even decades later, whenever he hunted or worked near that part of the Elkhorn Mountains, he found himself scanning the ground, always looking for a flash of yellow fabric, always hoping for a sign, always wondering. The case had become more than a file. It had become a ghost that followed everyone who had been there. Over the years, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office received a steady flow of tips, messages, and curious inquiries. Sheriff Diddle, years later, explained that he still received around 2 inquiries every month from people who thought they might have information, or believed they had seen someone who looked like an age-progressed image, or simply wanted to share a theory. Not all leads were credible. Many were based on speculation. Some were generated by online sleuths who had become deeply fascinated by Nyleen's story. But officers read every message, checked every tip, followed up on every possible match. Because even after 3 decades, no one could shake the feeling that the answer had to be out there somewhere. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children periodically released new age-progressed images of what Nyleen might look like as she aged: 12 years old, 25 years old, 33 years old, 43 years old. Each image was a glimpse of a life she never had the chance to grow into. Every time a new image went public, the phones would ring again. Someone thought they saw her. Someone thought a coworker resembled her. Someone believed a woman they met in a grocery store might be the missing girl from Montana. Most of these leads went nowhere, but they sparked the same bittersweet hope in her family. What if this time it really was her? In the decades after the disappearance, investigators often returned to the mountains, not because they expected an easy answer, but because the area was simply too vast, too rugged, and too complex to ever truly search in its entirety. They brought cadaver dogs. They used heavy machinery to clear areas of interest. They re-examined mine shafts. They followed up on newly discovered maps, old photographs, and accounts from hunters who thought they saw something unusual. Even 30 years after Nyleen vanished, teams walked through the forest again, searching for anything: a scrap of fabric, a small shoe, a trace of remains. But the mountains remained silent. Whatever happened on that June afternoon had been swallowed by the landscape. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, Nyleen's case had evolved from a local tragedy to a subject of intense interest across online true crime forums. Her disappearance contained all the elements that draw communities of amateur detectives. A remote wilderness, a sudden disappearance, conflicting witness accounts, a mysterious man in a purple tracksuit, anonymous letters, untraceable phone calls, an unresolved tragedy in the victim's family, and absolutely no physical evidence. Online theories multiplied. Some believed she was abducted by a stranger. Others thought the man in the letters was real and had raised her. Some believed she had walked into the forest alone and succumbed to exposure. Others developed darker theories involving trafficking networks. The sheriff's office monitored the discussions and occasionally found useful tips among the speculation. But most theories were unfortunately just that, theories. Not evidence. Not answers. Just possibilities. Over the years, investigators have considered several plausible explanations for what happened to Nyleen. Scenario 1. She wandered away and was never found. This was the earliest theory. A 4-year-old, barefoot, walking into dense forest, could have quickly become lost, disoriented, and unable to return. But this scenario has problems. She hated walking without shoes. Hundreds of searchers were nearby. Dogs tracked no scent beyond the creek. No trace of her was ever found. Clothes from a child that young would likely have surfaced eventually. Some veteran searchers believe it is impossible she traveled far enough to evade detection. The Elkhorn Mountains contain numerous old mines, some shallow, others dangerously deep. Investigators searched many shafts. Divers checked flooded ones. Machinery cleared collapsed areas. Nothing was found. But some shafts were inaccessible, unstable, or hidden by debris. A few still have never been fully explored even today. Officials did not rule this out. But again, there was no evidence, no clothing, no blood, no signs of disturbance. Even predators typically leave some trace. None was found. This remains the most debated scenario. It fits with the children's independent accounts, the unknown man approaching her, the man's statements in the letters, the possibility of someone leaving the picnic area unnoticed due to the chaos, lack of physical evidence suggesting an accident. But there are problems. No vehicle was seen. No verified witness saw her escorted away. No suspect was ever identified. The letters and calls could have been a hoax. Still, many investigators quietly believe this is the most likely explanation. This is perhaps the most chilling possibility. The details in his letters, dental development, height, weight, mannerisms, felt eerily accurate to some. The travels he described matched unconfirmed sightings across several states. He knew things not released publicly. But there was one issue. He was never found. Not once. Not ever. No fingerprints. No handwriting match. No trace in Madison, Wisconsin. It was as if he appeared from nowhere and returned to nowhere. Officers who have worked the case over the decades believe different things. Some, like Ralph Dunzo, lean toward the possibility she was abducted and her identity was changed, perhaps even trafficked or sold. Others, like Ken Gardner, believe she could still be alive somewhere, unaware of who she truly is. Others believe she likely passed away in the mountains soon after disappearing. But the truth is simple. No one knows. And that uncertainty is the hardest part. Today, Nyleen Kay Marshall is still listed on the National Missing Persons Clearinghouse. Her file remains active. The case remains officially open. Her photo, age progressed many times, still appears in databases, bulletins, and online profiles. Every new forensic advancement gives investigators one more tool they didn't have before. Every new tip could be the one that breaks the silence. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office has said plainly, "We will keep this case open until we have answers." And that promise has never been broken. For the Marshall family, life never returned to normal. Nancy Nyleen's mother lived every day with the weight of unanswered questions until her tragic death in 1995. Those who knew her said she never lost hope. She never stopped fighting. She never stopped believing her daughter was out there somewhere. Her husband, Kim Marshall, carried that hope for both of them after she passed. He kept their remaining children close, tried to give them stability, and pushed forward even as the absence of one child overshadowed everything. Nyleen's siblings grew up with memories of a sister who vanished when they were still young, memories of playing near the creek, memories of searching the woods, memories of their mother's grief. The family's greatest pain has always been the same. There was never a goodbye, never a moment of closure, never an answer to the question that has haunted them for decades. What happened to Nyleen? The disappearance of a child does not only impact one family, it reshapes the community around them. In Helena, Boulder, and the surrounding Montana region, Nyleen's case marked a turning point in how search operations were organized, how wilderness safety was taught, and how community members responded to emergencies. Hundreds of volunteers had dropped everything to search for her, many bringing their own gear, their own horses, their own tools, driven purely by compassion. For some, it was the first time they had seen such a massive operation. For others, it became the moment they committed to long-term search and rescue work. Her disappearance left a permanent mark on everyone who had been there. Even decades later, the name Nyleen Marshall brings a quiet heaviness to those who remember the search, a story passed down across generations of local rescuers. One of the biggest challenges in understanding Nyleen's disappearance is the era in which it happened. In 1983, DNA testing did not yet exist. There were no GPS-tracked search routes, no drones, no thermal drones, limited portable communication equipment. Search dogs were available, but not as sophisticated or widespread. Crime scene preservation was not handled with today's precision. Public alerts were slower. Database sharing between states was almost non-existent. If this same disappearance happened today, investigators would have access to phone records, traffic cameras, satellite images, drone mapping, detailed heat scans, rapid nationwide alerts, DNA-driven identification, much faster communication between agencies. But in 1983, the law enforcement community did the absolute best they could with what existed at the time. And despite Herculean efforts, the forest was simply bigger and more unforgiving than the tools they had. Criminal profilers who have studied the case over the years point to several possibilities regarding the man who claimed responsibility in letters and phone calls. There are three main interpretations. Interpretation 1, a hoaxer seeking attention. This type of person typically injects themselves into a high-profile case, provides just enough believable detail to seem credible, thrives on the emotional reaction, disappears when pressure increases. Yet the man had details that were never released publicly. He also spoke about Nyleen with a chilling familiarity. Investigators never fully ruled him out as the real abductor. Interpretation 2, the genuine abductor. If the man was truly responsible, he may have taken Nyleen to fill an emotional need, raised her under a new identity, moved her across cities to avoid detection, controlled her environment completely. This explanation fits many details in his letters, including the mention of homeschooling, traveling, and changing her name. It also explains how so many nationwide tips reported seeing a girl who resembled Nyleen in different places. But the biggest question remains: why would he contact authorities at all? Some offenders have been known to take pride in outsmarting investigators or to seek validation for their actions. But the mystery remains unsolved. Interpretation 3, someone obsessed with the case. A third possibility is that the writer was a person who had followed the case intensely and convinced himself he was connected. These individuals sometimes memorize case details, create a fantasy involving the victim, insert themselves psychologically into events they had no part in. If this was the case, the letters were a cruel deception, one that caused immense pain to the family. Despite decades passing, hope has not faded. Advances in modern forensic science mean that cases thought to be unsolvable in the 80s and 90s are now being solved regularly. If even a single piece of clothing, bone fragment, or personal item from Nyleen is ever located, modern technology could identify her through DNA, determine how long the item had been exposed, reveal whether she was moved, compare genetic material with national databases. The development of genetic genealogy, the same method used to identify the Golden State Killer, could also play a role. Even a tiny trace of DNA could reveal a lineage, a family tree, biological relatives, a suspect's identity. It would take only one discovery to finally answer the questions that have haunted Montana for more than 40 years. One of the most puzzling and heartbreaking aspects of the case is that after so many thousands of volunteer hours, so many helicopters, so many dogs, and so many grid searches, nothing was ever found. Search experts point to 3 reasons this could have happened. The Elkhorn Mountains are filled with ravines, thick brush, steep drops, hidden mine shafts, underground pockets, dense forest cover. It is entirely possible she ended up in a location searchers simply never passed within range of. This supports the abduction theory. If she was led or carried away before the full search mobilized, she could have been far beyond detection. The forest roads, especially in 1983, were lightly patrolled and difficult to monitor. On the first day, the scene was flooded by volunteers. Footprints were erased. Scent trails were contaminated. Possible clues were accidentally destroyed. This was no one's fault. It was the natural result of a desperate community reacting in real time. But the timing of that chaos remains one of the biggest obstacles to the investigation. Today, more than 40 years after the disappearance, people still gather to talk about the case. Former investigators still bring her up in interviews. Searchers still remember her yellow shirt. Families still tell their children the story of the girl who vanished and was never found. Her name remains one of the longest-running missing child cases in Montana history. Her photo remains in every major missing persons database. Her case file remains active. And her story continues to be shared. Some believe she passed away in the mountains. Some believe she may still be alive under another name. Some believe the man in the letters was real. And some believe the truth lies somewhere in the middle. But one thing remains certain. A child does not simply disappear. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened to Nyleen Kay Marshall. Every unsolved case carries its own set of mysteries, but the disappearance of Nyleen Kay Marshall is different. It is both incredibly complex and painfully simple. A 4-year-old child vanished, and the world has never seen a trace of her since. But within that simplicity lives a labyrinth of unanswered questions that investigators, volunteers, and true crime researchers have wrestled with for 4 decades. Multiple children described him. None of them spoke to each other before recounting what they saw. Their stories were consistent. So who was he? Why was he there? And where did he go? The anonymous writer seemed to know details never made public. He described characteristics and routines that closely matched Nyleen's known personality, but his identity was never found. His phone calls never traced to a person. His handwritten letters never matched any known suspect. If he was truthful, Nyleen may have lived under another name. If he was lying, the cruelty is immeasurable. Nancy's death in Mexico raised alarms that were never resolved. Her room door was forced open. Her hands were bound. Her wedding ring was gone. Yet the official explanation did not reflect those details. Was her death connected to the case? Or was it a separate tragedy in a family already devastated by loss? Not a shoe. Not a piece of clothing. Not a bone. Not a single confirmed trace. In a forest searched by thousands, such total absence is almost unheard of. Unless she was removed quickly, or unless she ended up in an area no human reached. The timeline is painfully short. A few steps ahead. A moment of distraction. A single turn of the head. And she was gone. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office has remained committed to the case for more than 40 years. Officers who were not even born at the time of the disappearance now review the file, study maps, and consider modern techniques that didn't exist in 1983. Sheriff Diddle said, "We get calls, emails, tips every month. This case is always there. It is never forgotten." Investigators have repeatedly returned to the disappearance site, hoping that shifting terrain or seasonal changes might reveal something new. But the forest, stubborn and quiet, has kept its secrets. Nyleen's disappearance occurred during a time when missing child procedures were still evolving. Her case directly influenced improvements in statewide coordination, inter-county communication, volunteer organization, cross-state record sharing, early childhood safety education, mapping techniques for large-scale searches, preservation of potential evidence in search zones. Her case was referenced in multiple training programs for search and rescue teams across the United States. Every child found because of improved systems owes a little piece of thanks to the children whose cases came before, including Nyleen. Why does this case continue to resonate even after so many years? Because it embodies the deepest fear of every parent. A child disappearing into thin air. Because it captures the strength of a community that would not give up. Because it intersects with mystery, tragedy, unanswered questions, and the possibility, however faint, that she may still be out there somewhere. Every new generation of investigators inherits not only the official file, but the emotional weight of the story. A sense of responsibility to the little girl in the yellow shirt who vanished beside a creek. They carry the same hope as those who searched for her in 1983, that the truth will one day be found. Could the case still be solved? The answer is yes. Even decades later, there are several ways this case could absolutely be solved. One, discovery of physical evidence. A hiker, hunter, or forestry worker could stumble upon remains or clothing lost deep in the wilderness. This alone could lead to DNA testing, forensic identification, a reconstruction of events. 2A, confession or deathbed revelation. Someone who knows the truth may still be alive. Silence can last years until it can't. 3, identification of the letter writer. Handwriting databases have grown. DNA can sometimes be recovered from old envelopes. Modern forensic linguistics could analyze tone and phrasing to identify a likely profile. 4, someone realizes they are Nyleen. If she was taken and raised under another name, she may someday question her childhood. Stories of origin confusion. Lack of early records. Inconsistent family history. It has happened in other cases. It could happen here. 5, modern technology breakthroughs. Genetic genealogy has solved decades-old cases once believed impossible. New advancements appear every year. A small breakthrough could change everything. Despite the unanswered questions, despite the despair her family endured, despite the decades of silence, Nyleen's story continues to inspire compassion. She represents hope against unimaginable odds, the strength of community, the refusal to forget, the determination of investigators who work cases long after the cameras fade, the promise that every missing child deserves to be found. Her legacy lives not only in the hearts of her family, but in the countless searchers, volunteers, and advocates who have carried her story forward. On that June afternoon in 1983, the mountains were full of life. Children played by the creek, families shared food and laughter. The forest air was warm and sweet. And then, within a moment, a life was altered forever. What happened to Nyleen Kay Marshall remains one of the greatest mysteries in Montana history. But her story reminds us of something powerful. Even when the world goes quiet, even when the trail goes cold, even when decades pass without answers, there are people who will never stop searching, never stop hoping, never stop remembering. Nyleen's case remains open. Her name remains active in national databases. Her story remains alive. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened in the Elkhorn Mountains that day. And until the truth emerges, we continue to tell her story. If you found this documentary meaningful, please take a moment to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button. At Beyond the Case, we bring you the mysteries that deserve to be remembered, the stories that still need answers. Your support ensures that these voices are never forgotten.